Good afternoon, everyone. Hope all is well. This is chapter 11, managing the classroom. It's a long chapter, as you all are probably aware at this point, after having read it, but it is a critically important one. So I'm going to get right into some of my comments on chapter 11 now. Just as I've repeated in our other two videos, I can't possibly do justice to the chapter in the 15 minutes that I've allotted for myself, but I'll do my best to do a quick overview and refer you to some important and key parts of the chapter that you're going to need to read. So let's take a look here at our PowerPoint. I am going to minimize myself and move me down here into the corner. Hopefully everybody can still see me. And I am going to go and turn our PowerPoint into presentation mode. So let me probably better put me up here. Hopefully you can all still see me. All right, so this is a long chapter, so while this 15-minute summary will not do the content any favors, I do encourage everyone to please read the entire chapter on your own. So I've got me back to page 1 here as I'm looking down at the text. And we are on page, this one starts off on page 308. So, managing the classroom, that is, taking a look at these sections, we've got goals of classroom management, the impact of society on your teaching and classroom, specific classroom management modules, managing classroom routines, and then managing the classroom environment. So all of this is covered in this text. This is a lot, but it is very important to your first assignment. Tangentially important to your discussion board post, but definitely important for your first assignment. So the goal of the chapter: enable you to be an effective manager of your instructional environment. And it is critically important part of you being a teacher. If you are an ineffective manager of your instructional environment, then you're going to be challenged with a variety of different things over the course of your teaching profession. And I might even argue that if you're not an effective manager, your time in teaching probably will be brief. So this really is important, and hopefully the information gleaned from this chapter can help you make some of the important decisions that you need to make early on in your career. History of discipline. So the book talks a little bit about discipline. It defines it as a preservation of order and a maintenance of control, but that's far too narrow of a definition. The way in which we want to think about discipline, especially from a teacher's perspective, is, what responsibility do you have in this process to keep that classroom not only engaged but motivated and on task, because with off-task behavior comes discipline issues. And so the book refers us to figure 11.1, and this is the interaction among the three factors that determines classroom order and learning. The factors are teacher, situation, and student, and it talks a lot about you as the teacher being able to negotiate what the situation is, that student's response to that situation, and then how then are you going to respond to that and to that situation, so that you can create a classroom environment that's conducive to learning, as well as making sure that everyone in the class has an opportunity to connect. So you need to think about what your classroom is going to look like, and then you also need to think about how is that classroom set up to function. So the book talks about 4 different changes that have really come to prove important since like the 70s and 80s. First, families have become more mobile. Second, the breakup of the traditional family. Third, students began to view school as something to get through. Social promotion became something a little bit more of an issue that teachers have had to deal with. And lastly, things like gangs, violence, high dropout rates, poverty, all things that have really played into some of the challenges that we as teachers see in terms of how we manage that environment. Because remember, when we're managing a classroom is one thing, but that classroom is always going to be situated within a school environment. That school is always going to be situated within a community, and that community is going to be situated within a county, which has its own set of rules, situated within a state, which has its own set of rules as well. So it's challenging for a teacher to take all of that into consideration while they're setting up what has to happen in their class. So, the argument, I think, on page 310 that they're trying to make is that teachers also just need to be more proactive in terms of how they're going to set up their classroom, manage it, and then create a culture that's going to be successful for them. So the next part was understanding the variables of classroom management. Again, I alluded to some of these, but a norm is what we consider to be a generally accepted behavior or rule or a pattern. And norms are important because, we need to understand what the norms are for that specific context in which we work. Power and understanding, your role and your position in that classroom. So, to be an effective manager, the book might argue that we must learn to exercise the least amount of power necessary in order to create that desired learning environment for ourselves. And last but not least, awareness, the teacher's attention and insight about classroom environment. What verbal and nonverbal cues are you going to use that's going to maintain that classroom culture and climate in a way that's productive. So the more experience you have, obviously, the better you get at negotiating all of those things. So experience is definitely something that's important. The book talks a little bit about the impact of society on your teaching in classroom. Classroom is a social and an emotional environment as much as it is a learning environment. I think that's a really, really important statement. Social and emotional environment as much as it is a learning environment. And Table 11.2 actually highlights some of the academic indicators that help us think about reinforcing diversity, cooperation, and involvement. So I'm going to encourage you to look at those. And you'll see on page 313 and 314 that those reinforcement indicators are really, really important. So it divides them up into academic indicators and then school climate indicators. So achieving diversity and cooperation, this is where we're enlisting students to help with classroom activities and rules, because I think it's important that students have some ownership for the different things that you all are going to agree to is important for your classroom environment, because your classroom environment as a teacher is also their classroom environment as a student. So one of the things that I did with my kids was we would literally sit down and have a long conversation about what we all felt was important in order for class to be productive for them as well as for me. I had some non-negotiables, of course, and you tended to see that my non-negotiables in a lot of ways were reflected back on what their non-negotiables were. And so we had those conversations. And so while I think the classroom rules and activities and the consequences for enforcing those all were bought into by students because they came up with them. And they tended to be very similar almost every single year to what I felt was important. So, achieving that cooperation and the diversity of responses from everyone, again, is really, really important. So you want to be as inviting as you possibly can so that way they have some input. And I'm sitting here just looking over some more information. One of the things I thought was pretty cool was in these gender and race issues, there was this TESSA program. It's defined as Teacher Expectations and Student Achievement on page 314. And so teachers who value equity incorporate these strategies in the classroom. And I think as you see underneath the categories of response opportunities, feedback, and personal regard, you're going to find a lot of these are very simple, strategies that you can use on a daily basis and probably use in your own personal life. So again, it's coaching those kids into hearing that, understanding these things, and coming to some type of value for them as well. And that's on page 315, so you can see those 15 elements. One of the things that I talked about in terms of education equity in terms of gender and race issues, we in STEM, in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, have for years had low female and minority participation. So if that's the case, then we as teachers have to figure out why. Why is it that we have low female and minority participation in those fields? And what can we do to help, motivate women and minorities into those areas? And so having that mindset and saying to yourself, you know what, there's a problem here, there's low representation. What am I doing on my end as a STEM infused teacher? What am I doing on my end to help support these students in ways in which we might not have done so in the past? So that's a critically important thing to think about when you're planning your instruction. Education equity and student tracking, labeling students as low performing. We all know that this can be devastating. Sometimes labeling students even with a special education label, or if we track them and we label them as low performing, students hear these things, they know that, they realize that, and you just have this self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, if they're going to be labeled as low performing, then chances are that's all I am is low performing. So we got to be very, very careful about providing labels to kids. One of the things I think that the book talks a lot about is fostering parent involvement. What's critically important, the message is get parents involved. There's a variety of working parents that we have, like, households that have two working parents at home. These parents tend to be less involved with their kids, but they do use tech. So you as a teacher can use technology to engage them. And that's one of the critical things, whether it's email, whether it's even social media, depending on what type of social media you're using. This is effective with single parents as well. We as teachers need to understand their limitations. They may be working one or even two jobs to make ends meet. So we have to make sure that when we communicate with them, we do so in a way that they're getting that information based upon that their inability maybe to get to campus at a certain time. Kids being raised by extended families. This is important when we're thinking about we need to build relationship with whoever that caregiver is, and then meeting effectively with parents, utilizing parent orientation, initiating parent contact, again, using technology as a means through which we can communicate with them on a regular basis. So one of the things on page 317 that I really liked was a questions most frequently asked by parents. So make sure you get a chance to take a look at that. I have a few minutes left, and I know I'm not going to get to everything, but here's the table I alluded to earlier, table 11.1 that's been included. These student self-discipline strategies. What you're going to see is this continuum of self-discipline versus imposed discipline. I'm going to move ahead real quick, and you're going to see this continuum of classroom management modes. So you'll see how you have self-discipline on one end, imposed discipline on the other, and you as a teacher have to find where you exist, where you fit on this continuum, and then how that's going to relate to integration in your classroom. So the book talks a little bit about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It talks about the humanistic approach. See figure 11.3. For that one, it's got that triangle, and it's just showing you students' behavior is determined by their needs at that specific time, and you as a teacher have to work hard to really understand what their need is if there's an off-task behavior in your class. A lot of information about moral reasoning and character building. We hear the term character education, and this is important because there are lots of character education curriculum out there. But what's really important as it translates into your classroom is there needs to be a consensus surrounding this approach. So if you're going to run a democratic classroom, and see page 321 for further explanation on that, you just need to make sure that everybody is in agreement about the morals and characters that you're trying to build. Reality therapy. This is a positive, genuine human involvement that allows people to recognize their own reality, and then they begin to reshape their behaviors without any threats or implied punishments. And see page 322. And it talks a lot about, and even gives you some principles of the reality therapy. There are 7 all told. Imposed discipline strategies. You know what? I'm going to stop the video right here, and then I'm going to record a second one and add that as from before I start picking up the rest of this.